ulu awamo, or kua. And before I introduce our work a little more, I wanted to just play this short video for you on our work.
Of Hawaii. Ulu is to grow. Awamo is the carrying stick, used to shoulder the weight of many. Kua'aina ulu awamo means grassroots growing through shared responsibility. Kua is a backbone organization that supports networks of communities across Hawaii. They are fishers, farmers, fish pond kia'i, and limu gatherers. Together, these practitioners, educators, researchers, and community stewards are working toward a shared vision in Aina Momona, rich, abundant ecological systems that support community well-being. These experts of land and sea hold wisdom and solutions for some of Hawaii's most difficult social and environmental problems. Your support helps us respond to the needs of our communities. It helps build a better and more just future for generations to come.
Kua'aina ulu awamo means grassroots growing through shared responsibility. Our acronym KUA means backbone. KUA was created as a gathering mechanism and a backbone organization to serve Malama Aina groups throughout the state, building a movement to better care for Hawaii. Vicky, thank you for joining us today. We have various members from across the state doing different types of Malama Aina work, some in partnership with our state, especially one, as of yesterday, passed rules for their fishery in Miloliʻi, Hawaii. The Hawaii State Constitution makes clear that our natural and cultural resources, including our nearshore marine resources, are subject to the public trust and therefore must be managed and protected for the benefit of present and future generations. The Hawaii State Constitution further requires the state and its agencies to protect and enforce Native Hawaiian rights, including traditional and customary practices associated with and dependent upon carefully managed and abundant nearshore resources. Our group is primarily concerned with issues, although of course we have a broad vision for Hawaii beyond just the conservation-oriented work, but our focus really is on how we govern and manage our natural resources and work with our government to do that, or not work with our government. So but we have a number of questions for you, but we'd like to open first with just an introduction to us. Maybe tell us a little bit about your background and the focus of your campaign.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for this opportunity to meet with all of you virtually. So I'm Vicky Cayetano. I was born 66 years ago in Manila, Philippines, and came to this country really by chance. My sister Ginny was a very talented, and still is a very talented piano player. She was a child prodigy. And back then there was a #1 variety show in this country called the Ed Sullivan Show. She was discovered by Ed Sullivan, who brought our family over for what was supposed to be a 1-year visit, and turned out to be really the privilege of a lifetime to be a citizen in the greatest country in the world. So fast forward 34 years ago, I started a small business called United Laundry. It was to serve the healthcare community with laundry services. We started with 25 employees, and then over the 34 years grew it to pre-pandemic 6 locations on 3 islands with 1,200 employees serving both healthcare and hospitality. Then COVID hit, and all the problems that we had been dealing with as a state, from affordable housing, economic diversification, cost of living, all those things just became more exacerbated. As a business, we ourselves were heavily impacted, and really made all of us, I think, understand the overdependence on tourism as a state. And so fast forward last year, knowing the challenges facing our state, and many of them, very candidly, as you know, we've been talking about for decades. And I look at myself and I see a person who has been blessed and fortunate to have a successful career. But really at 66, you start thinking about what legacy you want to leave behind. And those who know me know I'm not a complainer, I'm a doer. And so I felt very strongly that the state of Hawaii needs leadership, that one is going to take care of the Hāʻena, is going to take care of the majority of the people, and who's going to balance the power of government that so often is focused on special interests and big business. And everything in my life I believe in is all about balance. And so I'm fortunate to not have to be beholden to anyone, being governor. If I have that privilege, is not a stepping stone to another job, is going to be my last job. And so I know the tremendous amount of work and difficult decisions that are going to be needed to be made so that we can put Hawaii back on the right path, diversify our economy, address affordable housing, not just talk about it, but address it, and bring our young people back. For 5 years in a row, Hawaii's population has been down, down, down. And the sad part is the people who are leaving our state are our young people and our working people. Without the young people, we have no future. Without the working middle class, without a thriving middle class, you cannot have a thriving community. So that's why I am running for governor. And the topics we discussed today about climate change, about water, about preserving, taking care of the endangered species that we have, protecting our resources, all of those things are really critical for our Hāʻena and for the state of Hawaii. So I look forward to having these conversations. And once again, just thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Vicky. I guess I'll start with the first question. I'm Kevin, born and raised on Oahu. I'm from Kahaluʻu, grew up sort of at this place in the middle of what became a city and the country. And I grew up with communities that sort of actually held off the city, I would say, from moving into our countryside, and have managed to perpetuate their culture and practices. And I believe one day it's going to be the place where our community looks to for survival and for feeding ourselves. So I guess my question to you really is, if elected, what would your administration's top 3 priorities be in regards to Hawaii's natural resources?
So the first thing for me is always about the team that surrounds the governor. I think that's very key. The qualification, the caliber of the people that hold these positions. So that's first and foremost. Second thing I think is understanding some of the tremendous challenges that we need that's going to impact our community. As you say, the state constitution is clear that we need to be good stewards, holding in trust for the people of Hawaii, Hawaii's natural resources. What does this mean, though? That means that we need to really focus on the conservation of all these resources. But at the same time, I understand that there's always the other side of it that says that the fishing and the hunting, that is our right for us. And we need to have that balance. So we need to have these difficult conversations as a community so that we can move forward in enacting not only, I believe, the need for tougher rules and laws on fishing, disappearing fish, ocean marine life, coral reefs, but knowing that there's also communities that I believe will not necessarily be supportive of it. And so we need to bring that balance together. But my top 3 priorities would be having the right people in the right positions, initiate what's needed to have those difficult discussions, and simultaneously look at what we need to do in order to make sure that the disappearing fish and ocean marine life, water that's precious, without water, there's no life. All those things that we need to do are implemented. But I find that a lot of times when you have to move and make those tough decisions, if we don't have those conversations with those who oppose it early on, we are not able to enact it, and we need to do that. And the third thing for me is look at the staffing. You know, I understand, for example, at the DLNR, the Department's Division of Conservation and Resource Enforcement, DOCARE, they only have about 80 people on staff to patrol what's needed. I mean, that is sorely inadequate. And so if we're looking to enforce, we need to also support with funding and staffing what needs to get done. So it's these kinds of critical details that are needed in order for us to really produce the outcome that we all want.
Thank you, Vicky. I'll pass it to Uʻi.
Mahalo nui. Aloha, Vicky. Thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon. I'm Uʻilani Naipo. I'm a lineal descendant of Miloliʻi, South Kona on the island of Hawaii. The second question we have for you speaks to a personal experience for my community of Miloliʻi. So it's taken over 2 decades for the rules to be formed, proposed, scoped, evaluated, gone through Chapter 91 process. And yesterday we had the governor come to Miloliʻi accompanied by the current First Lady of Hawaii, and he signed the rules package. So we're looking forward to promulgation of the rules and very happy. But we're only the second CBSFA in all of Hawaii since 1994, Hāʻena being the first. So here's a little context and question for you. For nearly 3 decades now, communities like mine have worked with government agencies to come up with collaborative solutions to natural resource management that are consistent with Native Hawaiian practices. Our customary and traditional subsistence practices are recognized in our Constitution. We have the ike that is crucial for protecting our lands and waters. Progress should not have taken nearly 30 years. As governor, how would your office support and expedite ongoing efforts at community-based natural resource management? How will you remove the barriers for progress? And how would your office encourage other communities to pursue place-based collaborative approaches to natural resource management?
Thank you for the questions. So I think, first of all, you know, the mindset of the leader is really important. Government is complex, but at the same time, it shouldn't take, as you say, nearly 30 years to have gotten this done. And I'm sure you realize yours is not an isolated situation. We were just talking with the agriculture folks, the farmers, and we were talking about ADC that was formed 28 years ago and similar issues. Where's the results? So I think it starts at the top. And one of the first things I would do is look at the process of what you just went through and see how together we can minimize the timeline it takes to get things done. And by doing that, not to bypass some of the key process that needs to be part of this, but to be able to eliminate some of the duplicity or unnecessary steps to bring this to fruition. But the other thing to me is just simply putting in place systems that have transparency and accountability. You know, it's why we have a calendar, is to keep us on track. But so many times, a simple thing like a process, there is no follow through. And before you know it, a year has passed already. I am used to living in a system where everything is tracked with transparency, with accountability, and with urgency. Separate from this, but just to show you an example of not accountability or follow through, is you must have read 2 months ago about how the state of Hawaii had to throw out $22.5 million worth of expired COVID test kits. I mean, $22.5 million of test kits is a lot. And the fact that that's our taxpayer money, right? And the fact that that was just thrown out shows you how such a serious lack of accountability, I hate to say it, but pretty much within the system at the state government. So I think we need to bring that kind of culture into place in all the things that we do, so that we can have the accountability that's needed in order to deliver more timely results. This is why people are so frustrated. When I campaign and go talk to people everywhere, they have the same issues that you bring up, whether it's affordable housing, whether it's farmers talking about it. Everything takes too long. Homesteaders who've died waiting on the list. It just goes on and on. This is the kind of culture that we need to change. And to change culture, we have to change the behavior.
Thank you for that. Let me just do a quick follow-up. So in looking at either in natural resource management or like lack of affordable housing, what you just described, there are barriers for moving the process along a lot quicker, quick enough for a feasible answer and a responsible response for those that are waiting on the wait list and so forth. So any of those examples you responded with, could you identify what you believe the barriers are, more specifically what the barriers are? For example, like the wait list, that you think that you would implement a solution that could be impactful a lot quicker.
So if I may, let's take affordable housing as one example. So one of the things I would do, because that's been talked about, and it is so critical to our communities. So one of the things I would do is I would reach out and work with the counties to look at their permitting and planning process. And where there is duplicity in our efforts, I see no reason why we would take somebody or a developer to go through one layer of permitting planning only to repeat it at the state level. Of course, there are departments like SHPD, which is unique to the state, so they would still have to go through that. But I think, you know, where we can eliminate duplicity of the process, where we can expedite time, because time is money. That is what I mean in terms of being able to expedite the process. The other thing I find is that it's very interesting to me that the government has a tendency of not involving the community until much later on into a project. Okay, and this almost always results in a breakdown in communication and mistrust in the project, which then ends up with lawsuits, which ultimately causes more delays. So to me, one of the ways we counter this is to involve communities early on in the process, so that the objections, the opposition we need to hear should be heard early on, so that we can address it and work with it rather than do it on the backside. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'll pass it off to, who do I have? Wesley? Uncle Presley?
Jenny, I think.
Okay,
Oh,
Jenny, yes.
I can go. Aloha, Vicky. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. I appreciate it so much. My name is Jenny Yagodich, and I grew up and still live in Pūpūkea out on the North Shore of Oahu, where I actively work in ocean conservation, education, and stewardship. And you touched on this a little bit earlier, but my question is, DLNR's Division of Aquatic Resources and Division of Forestry and Wildlife create the rules that help protect our natural resources across Hawaii. The Division of Conservation and Resources Enforcement, or DOCARE, is tasked with enforcing those rules. However, DOCARE is woefully underfunded, understaffed, and not fully equipped to uphold its natural resource enforcement responsibilities. How would you ensure DOCARE has the adequate funding it needs so that they can effectively enforce the rules and regulations currently in place to protect our natural and cultural resources? Also, how soon can we expect this to happen?
So funding, that's of course within the governor's budget. So with that said, it's one thing to fund it, but the other thing we have to do is in all the departments, I'm told virtually, almost all, there's a real staffing shortage, and finding people is another big challenge, so this is going to be something we need to address with urgency, but we can fund it. That's not going to be as difficult as I think finding the staffing needed to do that. We're going to need to really think out of the box to find these solutions. Also look at, to me, one of the ways that we should be able to consider is work with communities, because I find many people in our communities are just as concerned as the government is with these issues. So I would be working with the communities and having regular meetings to not only hear about the problems, but to see what we could do with community members, to see how they can be a resource in reporting violations, how we can utilize that and not make it where they have to wait a day to get a response, but really activate our communities to see how they can be more of a resource in helping us address these violators and these issues together while we build up our staffing. I mean, 80, I'm just really shocked, when you think about what they have to do and having only about 80 officers covering the areas of responsibility that they have. It's just unbelievable. And, I would just point out that many of these issues didn't just occur overnight. And that's what's troubling, and so this is what I mean about we have to move with more urgency, because when we get to the point where the problem is so great, it becomes so much more difficult to resolve it. But I would like to see more community engagement to see how we can work with them to help us with these problems. And at the same time, increase the funding is not as big an issue, but how we're going to get the staffing is absolutely key in order to do this.
Mahalo, thank you. And I will pass over to Press.
Aloha, Mrs. Cayetano. My name is Presley Wann, and currently I'm the president of Hui Makaina Na o Makana, located in Hāʻena, Kauai. I'm also a lineal descendant of that place. I also have done quite a few of community service and appointed to several boards, including one appointed by your husband. I served on the Kauai Nihao Barrel Council. We in Hāʻena, we have seen the damage that tourism does to our communities. Perfect example, the flood 2018 and recently COVID. We understand the huge importance to the economy, but how exactly will your administration change how tourism is managed?
So one of the ways we manage tourism or the number of people coming into us is to manage the capacity. While free travel does not allow you to legally actually say you can't have more than 9 million visitors, you can manage it with the number of hotels that you build, that you're allowing them to build. I know in the county, city and county of Honolulu, as you know, vacation rentals, there's been a serious crackdown on that. That's going to be a big help. So we can manage it in a number of ways. Control capacity, both with lift space as well as hotels. If a hotel, a new development comes up to be permitted for, that is something that needs to be seriously considered, because that's just going to add more capacity. The other thing I would be looking at is to see how we could implement fees, conservation fees for popular destination sites, site fees along the trails, Hanauma Bay, Yaunito, other places like that, so that we can use those funds to do a better job of maintaining our resources. But I think the key is really to manage the capacity, both in the lift space coming in, as well as with the hotels that we allow. We have what we've got, but I think that any kind of future development needs to be really reconsidered.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think on behalf of the community, there is no appetite to have any additional development, not in the tourism, not in the hotel industry.
Thank you. I have a second part to my question. Could you help us understand what destination management approach to tourism is, and how will the balancing and catering to visitors while being mindful of the needs of the community, our quality of life, and the stresses on our natural environment? You kind of touched on it, but if you could just elaborate a little bit more.
So I think two things stand out for me. One is that the industry, and I'm hopeful with HTA's, destination management plans, that the tourism industry needs to do a better job of communicating with the visitor industry. You see it on the planes, not enough really at the hotels. And so I think HTA working with the hotels can do a better job of communicating with the tourists. But the other thing I would look at as well, because I am all about accountability, is I think we need to work and find a mechanism where hotels are held more accountable, because there is no accountability right now in terms of the resources that they use, whether it be water, utility, any of these resources that are shared with our residents. Right now, there's no mechanism in place to hold the hospitality industry accountable for utilization. And I would seriously look at how we can do that. And when we do that, they will be forced to communicate to their guests how much they can use, and whether it's talking about water conservation, utility conservation, we need accountability so that people can be mindful about how they use our natural resources. So to me, it's three things. It's accountability, it's better communication, and I think we need to look at the popular destinations that they go to, both in fees, but also in the hours that are made available to them versus to our residents. Once again, there needs to be balance. And that is something that can be managed, but we need to lead with that.
Thank you. I have Uncle Mac Poepoe from Molokai.
Hello, Vicky. My name is Mac Poi. Everybody call me Uncle Mac over here.
Hi,
I come
Uncle.
from Molokai.
Do you know Beverly?
Hello,
Do you know Beverly Paoli?
Paoli.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
we live in the same neighborhood, small island. Yeah.
We go way back. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I live here all my life on Molokai, and for many generations. My Ohana is from here. My dad came from Maui, and my mom grew up on this island, and I grew up on this island my whole life. So listening to all the previous questions, it kind of doesn't fit in with what we are about over here on Molokai. We don't have development. We only have one hotel, not too many tourists that come to Molokai. So we just purely dependent on Hāʻena. So my question should have been more Hāʻena based kind of question, but anyway, what we understand is that the state constitution mandates that the state shall promote the development and utilization of its resources in a manner consistent with their conservation and in furtherance of the self-sufficiency of the state. So it's really hard for me to understand because it kind of don't pertain to Molokai, although it can if we decide on having development on our island. But anyway, I might want to take this to a different question, which kind of pertain to what I really want to talk about. And sorry, guys. Yeah, I listened to you talk about communicating with the community, especially with the people from the opposition. And Moʻomomi, I've been working on Moʻomomi for my whole life. I know the place like probably better than anybody in the whole state. And from what I know is that the opposition that talk against what I'm trying to pursue, which is community-based management. It's always easy to say we don't want something, but they don't have any background on why they don't want it. So some of the background that I can provide you with is because they're the problem. They are the problem. So my question to you would be, how can you fix that problem rather than trying to consult with people that only want to oppose a lot of good stuff that we're trying to do in a state, which is manage our natural resources in a way that is consistent with the use. So if we don't look carefully at the opposition saying that they have rights, we all have rights. I agree with that. But we also have to be clear on how we utilize those rights. A lot of times we forget that, yeah, we're going to give you your right. Go ahead, go bust up the place. Take it any way you want to do it, as long as you stay within the parameters of the law. Okay. So you know that a lot of the laws don't really make sense. And that's the reason why we're here. So I'd like to know what you're going to do as a governor to look at these problems that we face, in particularly on this island of Molokai, where we don't have development and we hardly have tourism. We're only talking about people. Yeah.
So a couple of things. Thank you for that. One, I recognize, as I think we all do, that no governor is going to be successful if she or he only moves by consensus. It doesn't work that way, but everyone deserves to be heard. And so for me, it's about listening. It's about hearing what the majority of the people want to do, not the loud, silent minority. And then making the difficult decisions and communication of how we're going to move forward as a community. No governor is going to get everyone to agree with what they want to do. And I think this is why a lot of times they shy away from these hard conversations, but it's not going to progress our society, our communities to where we want it to be. So for Molokai, if I were governor, I'd be there listening, talking to the community to see what we can do on that island and what the majority of the people want to do for Molokai. And we cannot let a silent minority dictate their needs to the rest of the people.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with you. But I also have to say that it still doesn't answer the question on how we're going to deal with protecting our natural resources.
So when you say protecting your resources, Uncle, you're talking about your land, your water,
We're talking about our natural resources with fishing, hunting, whatever it may be, just natural resources, water, fish,
Are you talking about protecting it or specifically to keep it just for Molokai residents?
I'm just talking about Molokai because I think we addressed the previous questions you answered was addressed mainly for the statewide population. But I'm really concerned about Molokai. And I hate that I took it this way, but this is my opportunity and I'm going to take it. And I really want to have a straight answer rather than we're going to have to listen to the more consensus, what the people want to have. Maybe what the people want to have is not what we should have. That is what put everybody in a situation, in a negative situation that we're in. Now we're looking for answers. Molokai can provide that answer. In fact, we provided those answers in the past, but it's been shoved under the rug now. So
directly, I may then. Are you, when you say Molokai resources, are you talking about specifically overfishing?
Over everything, taking rather than balancing. So opposition is only about taking. I'm about balancing. Yeah. So when we take something, this is what I want people to learn. When we take something out of nature, whether it's fish, deer, a plant, whatever it may be, we're creating a void. We're creating a space that is empty. How do we fill a space? That's like the question I want to ask you. How do we refill a space?
Well, I can share with you philosophically, I think we're both on the same page, because when I talk to the folks at DLNR, one of the issues they're very frustrated about is what you're talking about, that there are people who don't consider, first of all, they consider themselves entitled to be above the law. And they have a very difficult time enforcing because they don't have adequate resources, or frankly, they use the fact that they're Native Hawaiians to say that they have a right to this. And there is no respect or acceptance of any kind of limitation on taking of whether it's fish or hunting. This is what they tell me. So for me, it's very important that we look at conservation for everyone across the state, all islands, and we need to uphold the law and we need to conserve. So, you know, one of the things that I would even think about is look at considering a ban on net fishing for a number of years to give a chance to replenish. Now, I know people who will say, I fish for my family, I need this. That's what I need to hear more of, but I would seriously look at banning any kind of net fishing for a period of time to give the opportunity for the fish to return, to be replenished. There's a certain life cycle that we need to have. But those are the kinds of conversations I'd appreciate having with you and others, those of you on this call, to understand what needs to be done to bring that balance.
Thank you, Vicky. I appreciate your answers, and I also want to make it clear that I'm a net maker. My family are net makers. We plant the olana and we make the net out of olana in the past. Today I don't do that, but I still practice net making. That is part of my culture. That is something I don't want to see disappear. And I think that is part of what we're talking about, the state upholding our traditional and customary practices. So I think it's really important to see the wider, the bigger picture, rather than digging into the law and try to create something that can fix, or hopefully can fix something that we already know how to fix. So I was one of the fishermen from Molokai that went up against the state when it created the net ban. And I fought for Molokai to get an exemption. And we got the exemption due to the fact that we depended on fishing and hunting for survival on our island. And that is the reason I'm talking about this, you know, and I'm really concerned because we don't see Molokai developing and using tourism as our economic engine. Yeah, so we're talking about self-sufficiency here, trying to be independent and not depend. We can grow our own food. We have the resources and infrastructure to do that. We just need more cooperation from the government.
So would you be looking to basically, how should I say, limit the number of people who fish from out of state or on foreign vessels? Is that what you think would be needed?
Yeah, I think every island need that. So we need limitations, we need restrictions, we need all the negative stuff that people don't want to be applied to the rules and laws that govern us. And hopefully we make good decisions on that. And that is what I'm trying to get at, you know, the decisions that going really make the difference. And a lot of the decisions, or let me correct, a lot of the answers I see from my experience is from the past that people use in the past. And I'm talking about my own family, you know, the way they conducted themselves, the things that we uphold to today, the things I teach my kids, the things that they're doing to continue this legacy that I'm talking about. I just hope that government can see the bigger picture and try to address it in a way that is consistent with what we want. And that's why I say Molokai is different from the rest of the island. Sorry, guys, I don't think it.
No, thanks,
I
Uncle.
Different. Yeah,
appreciate this. And just in the short
thank
time,
you.
thank you for enlightening me. I really
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Vicky. Oh,
Vicky,
aloha.
we have about 10 more minutes. I do have a question on my mind. I know you also have things to do, but I know Uʻilani wanted to add a little bit. You still want to speak to the question Mac asked?
Yeah, so I just want to maybe rephrase Uncle Mac's question. I listened to it, and because he's also supported Miloliʻi in our work to do our CBSFA work. And so let me ask the question this way. You know, sometimes the majority, like you mentioned, that you want to listen to, sometimes they don't have the best solutions to be the solutions to put protective measures in place, like he spoke about. How will you handle that? How do we get Uncle Mac's eloquent, very concise, and being our loyal, his ike is heard and is followed, and we embrace that in all of our work throughout the Pai'aina. How can we get that heard and prioritized over those who just don't want to be told what the protocol or the code of conduct of fishing in our waters are? And this is like, we all say this because we all been in communities that try to put together community-based solutions. And so we work hard to do so, and taking it back to the language put in place for a community-based subsistence fishing area. That voice and everything that supports our traditional practices for subsistence should be made a priority. And it's such a hard battle, and we spend so much in time, sweat, all of those that come and testify, and we all have to bring on the Uncle Mac to the table to speak on our behalf. But how would you work with that? You know, dealing with knowing that we have these voices out here speaking on behalf of the natural resources that nobody else is doing, but the majority is screaming in opposition. They're coming down and say, I have a right to be there. How would you weigh that in and make sure that our voices are heard and weighed in appropriately?
Well, I certainly heard Uncle Matt loud and clear. And I think that, you know, I've always said there's a difference between being smart and being wise. And wisdom is something that's not everyone has. I think as governor, it's very important to get out there yourself, to see, to hear, not just to rely on what your people tell you. So that's the kind of governor I would be, to go to Molokai, to meet, to listen, and to be able to stand up to the opposition if that's not the right decision that they want. You know, regardless of the numbers, you have to have the courage to speak up, just like you have today. So, you know, I don't think there's a recipe for that, but I think that being open to the communication, making sure that you go out to hear it yourself and not just rely on a director or manager to report back to you, and to be able to discern that.
Thank you, Vicky. We got about 5 minutes. Is it all right if I ask you a question and we can let you go?
Yeah, no, and my time is your time, so.
Thank you. My question is, and I think this follows along with kind of the thread that Uncle Mac and Uʻi have talked about. It. It's a little bit different about a voice of opposition. It is, if you're elected governor, how would you respond to legislative interference in the administrative rulemaking process? Our communities here have all tried to put forward rules where they can work with our government to take care of our resources, like in Miloliʻi yesterday. But one of the common threads has been the interference of other policymakers at the legislative level to stop this process and not allow communities to be a part of the solution.
So a couple of things. I think that we all recognize the power of the legislature. And as governor, one of the things I would do is reach out to them and have them early on in the process, rather than, for a lot of people, it's interesting. It's all about the control. They want to be engaged early on. But I think it's important to do that. And I, for one, will not tolerate that kind of disruption. I have seen them and how they treat people when they come to testify. That's just not acceptable. We need to treat everyone with respect. But that is a question that I appreciate. And as governor, I would work with the legislature to make sure that they're engaged in the things that we want to do, and to be able to hear what the opposition is earlier rather than later, and to tackle it, because the governor has to lead, not just be a messenger, and that's a very important criteria that I see in the next governor, especially with these difficult and important decisions, and a community that is more polarized. We have to make decisions in spite of that.
Thank you, Vicky. It's almost 4 o'clock. I actually have other questions have popped up while you're talking, but wanting to respect your time, unless you're open to it, I can ask you a couple more questions.
Sure.
Okay. One of those questions is that you mentioned the importance of having a good team surrounding the governor to implement state natural resource policy. From your perspective, who would be the right people for these important positions?
So I think it's people who have both the heart and the competence, the experience, the knowledge. This is very important. You cannot just bring in people who don't have that kind of wisdom and knowledge. So I would look for several qualities. But most of all, to me, it's really important is the heart to serve, ears to listen. There's a reason why you have 2 ears and just one mouth. So listen more than talk, and really the heart to do what's right. This is what I would look for in my team. It's certainly not somebody who wants to climb the ladder. It's got to be somebody who understands servant leadership and listening to the people in the community. That's one of the things I really feel that the state government has to do a better job in, and that is in having communication, and not just, I'm sorry, I know today we have to do by Zoom, but to me, there's nothing that beats being there to see it for yourself, to feel it, and to listen to the community members. That to me is priceless. And that's the kind of leader that I've always been and will continue to be if I have the privilege to be governor, is to get out there.
You, Vicky, another question is, you mentioned fees, like places fees like at Hanauma Bay, which has implemented a $25 per person fee. And since then, other places like Sharks Cove have seen a dramatic increase in visitors or having a detrimental effect on the marine environment. In other words, there's a spillover from Hanauma to Sharks Cove. It seems the fees don't result necessarily in less people. They just disperse them into other places. How would you prevent this from occurring?
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. And that's what I mean about seeing when you do one thing, how it connects to the other thing. We may need to just put a limit on the number of visitors at these locations. And one of the things I'd want to do is also make sure that we have an allocation for residents priority first. And these fees that I talk about, certainly is never the intent that residents would have to pay for that. It's strictly for the visitors. But I think what we have to do is come up with allocation of time for our residents, number of residents per day, whether they come or not, and then put a cap on the number of visitors allowed to these locations. With that said, of course, the challenge will be, again, having the staff to enforce this. You know, so it's a good idea, but it's always a challenge to implement and how to do this. But if we know that that's what we've got to do, we will find a way to do that. But I think that that's a very good point, that when you put in fees in certain places, you're just going to drive them to other locations where it can be a free visit. So we need to control that in one way or another. But I think that just overall, what we have to do is control the capacity of people coming in by managing the lift space with the airlines and managing the hotel capacity.
Thank you, Vicky. Actually, this is a question I really like. You mentioned staffing shortages as pretty much across the board, across all state government agencies. What do you think is the root cause of this shortage, and how will your administration address it?
I think the root cause is like it is for every industry, okay? Costs of living, housing, and lack of opportunities. I think for the state government, it's not been, how shall I say, it's not been very competitive, not only in pay, but more importantly, in the tools that we give the people to work with. You know, early on in my career, I realized that if you want to attract good people, it's not just about compensation. It's about the environment that they're in. I learned something very interesting, that the physicians at the Mayo Clinic actually aren't paid that much, but it's the ability to be surrounded by excellence that motivates them, that makes everybody want to go there. And in government today, the state government, we're operating on a 40-plus-year-old IT accounting system where departments cannot even communicate with each other. I mean, if that's the kind of message we send to our state employees, how motivated do you think they are to do a great job? And how capable are we to attract the best of the best if that's the kind of tools we give them? So we need to modernize state government so that we can bring people in, we can, you know, attract the best out there. But my message is going to be, like me, you have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to the directors, I would say this, to not just work, but to leave a legacy that you have made people's lives better. And that, to me, is the biggest motivation, is why I'm here.
Thank you, Vicky. It's 4:05. I have one last one I want to throw at you, and we'll let you go. I'm just going through a list of different questions folks have been typing out as you speak. And I like, this is a very simple question, but very pertinent to the work a lot of our folks are doing. And that question is, who is the community?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to respect always the Native Hawaiians, the indigenous people of Hawaii, because people like me, this is not our birthright to be here. We're just privileged to be here. So I think we always have to recognize, first and foremost, our host culture, because without that, Hawaii is not Hawaii. So that's the first thing I would say. With that said, we also need to understand where our future is, our young people. We need to listen to them, because without them, we have no future. So it is a balance of both. But I will just say one thing. The community is not how I see it today, where I feel too often special interests and big businesses are being served. That has to change. And that's why I'm running for governor.
Thank you, Vicky. We appreciate your time with us. And just we're just honored that you made the time to speak with us and listen to some of our thoughts and questions. And we wish you good luck in the rest of the few weeks coming up.
Thank you. Thank you for this time with you all. I've learned a lot. I'm not someone who professes to know everything. In fact, I think it's important for leaders to recognize and acknowledge what they don't know, and to have that humility and to listen and learn. And I have learned a lot today, so I thank you very much.
Thank you, Vicky. Mahalo nui.